Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining today's webinar on Windows Virtual Desktop. Excited to have you all joining us. We'll just give everyone a minute to grab their sandwiches and settle in. We'll get started shortly here. Assuming it's the lunch hour where you may be. All right, it's 2 minutes after, so I think we'll go ahead and rock and roll. We got some great content to share with everyone today and want to leave some time at the end for question and answer. But I did see on the attendee list we have some new folks joining us that might not be familiar with Synergy Technical and or Nerdio. So we'll make sure to do some proper introductions. But this is really our almost weekly webinar series that's held almost always as well on Thursday from 12 to 1 Eastern time. So monthly we do a security overview on Thursdays. We do a productivity overview. And then normally there's a third topic that sort of fluctuates based on the month. So this month you're joining us for the Windows Virtual Desktop topic. And I'm Dan Finn from the Synergy Technical team. I'm our Director of Strategic Accounts and excited to be talking about this topic today for the first 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to be introducing Tony Kai, who is a partner of ours with the organization called Nerdio. And they have a front-end interface that helps manage the virtual desktop environment and offers a lot of value and savings. So I'm coming off of 2 WVD pilots just completed, and both of them use Nerdio to configure the solution quicker than what they would have been able to do. And then they also chose to continue their usage of Nerdio to manage those environments moving forward. So for the back half hour or so, Tony will sort of walk us through that interface. And if you have questions as we go, Christina is our moderator from our marketing team. So Christina is going to open up the question box for anyone to drop them in there, and we'll make sure that we're addressing them as we go along. So you get me from the sales side. Tony's a little more technical, so don't hesitate to throw those kind of questions in there too. And if the two of us can't address them, we'll make sure to get you the answer and follow up shortly. So without further ado, let's get rolling. So a quick overview about Synergy Technical for those folks that might not be familiar with us. We're almost 10 years old now. November of this year will be our 10-year anniversary. And we were founded and headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, but offices all up and down the East Coast and staff mostly up and down the East Coast in Canada and India as well. We've been a Microsoft managed partner from day one, and our focus has always been to migrate users from their on-premise infrastructure into the cloud, enabling productivity, always with security on top of mind. So I think you'll see that come through with the solution we're talking about today as well. We also have a licensing practice. We're one of just about 20 Microsoft partners and around the nation that are a direct cloud solution provider or CSP licensing provider, meaning we don't go through distribution to buy the Microsoft licensing. We go direct to Microsoft for that and offer our technical support as part of that offering. And then we have a managed services practice as well for those clients that have a need around that. Around the security standpoint, we got awarded right before everything happened in March that we're all aware of. Our team flew out to San Francisco and we won the Security Deployment Partner of the Year award with Microsoft. So that was a really big honor for us. We were actually up against some big names that y'all are going to be familiar with, but we won't put them out there. But to come home with that award and that trophy was really a special honor for us, a recognition of the work that we've put in with our clients. And as you can see, we've been featured in Microsoft blogs many times now over the years. One just got published, I think, late last night, maybe this morning, with Hamilton Beach, which actually included Windows Virtual Desktop as well. But one I saw a lot of folks registered for today were from nonprofit organizations. We were also featured in a case study with Operation Smile back in 2014, 2015, that Satya Nadella actually highlighted during his keynote at the Worldwide Partner Conference. So a lot of experience in that space. So that growth over the last 9.5 years has led us to we manage over 2 million plus cloud licenses of 365. We've got customers in all 50 states and experience in 70 plus countries. And then everyone's got their logo slide, but I like to throw this out there that a lot of these are not just we did a job with this client, we get to use their logo. A lot of these are partnerships, and some even date back, to the day and the year that we were founded. So you'll see our clients run the gamut of different industries, nonprofit and commercial, different regulations and requirements that they're held to. But we really pride ourselves on building a relationship and being there for them for the long haul. So that's enough about Synergy Technical. Let's roll into the subject matter for today. And what is Windows Virtual Desktop? So I don't think we can talk, let me build that slide out further. I don't think we can talk Windows Virtual Desktop without first hitting on virtualization, right? And I think most folks are familiar with some of the benefits that it can bring to your organization. But in general, this slide covers, quite a few different areas. Being able to maintain full control and security over the versions of software and OSs that you have in your environment. The flexibility to easily spin up workstations. So rather than buying a workstation and white gloving it and configuring it, and we can just assign it a scalable virtual machine, right? So if you have outside vendors that need access into your environment, you can have them log into a virtual machine that you manage. If you have summer interns that, from the doesn't make sense to order a bunch of new laptops that are going to be used for 3 months, assign a virtual machine to them. So there's a lot of use cases in that space as well. And then specialized workloads. This plays quite true with, or rings true, I should say, in a couple scenarios I've dealt with lately with, custom applications that were built for a Windows 7 OS. So some of you might be laughing right now because you're trying to support an application that's just like that. Maybe it was built by someone that no longer works there, or it's on the roadmap to figure out how to upgrade that and make it supportable on Windows 10. But another path that we can take, instead of doing Windows 7 extended support, which is, last time I saw the pricing, $122 per desktop for 2021, we can move that environment into a more secure virtual machine and still have that application, that legacy application running for you. So I've seen use cases with CAD softwares. We can work through, potential latency and file storage type requirements. And then obviously in a development and a test environment, the ability to sort of wipe and restart and start fresh for those types of environments, there's a lot of benefits to virtualizing. So at a high level, these slides are going to be quite busy. I'm not going to hit on each talking point there, but if they sort of spark ideas in your mind or questions, feel free to enter them into the chat. But we're going to talk today about why you may find value in Windows Virtual Desktop, and of course the potential cost savings, right? I don't think anyone's going to do this because it triples their cost of a user's desktop. So I've got a section in here. We'll talk about that too before we get to Tony's demonstration of the Nerdio tools. But one of the biggest things is taking control and usage of all the benefits of Azure, and obviously that brings into focus the OpEx predictable spend and scaling to meet your needs on demand. And of course, if you're thinking, oh, I tried Windows Virtual Desktop a couple years ago and the user experience was not what it needed to be, I have great news for you. They're on version 2 and version 3 is coming down the pipe. So that user experience is greatly enhanced. We'll talk about that a little bit here today too. Including the ability to run that Windows experience that we all know and love across a multitude of devices. So I think Linux has actually been rolled out at this point, but Macs, iOSs, if you have iPad users, folks that need an application deployed to an Android platform, that's all supported now. So we've tested out, even with our own client base, heavy Excel users in the financial departments, users that are iPad only, and they're even cross-platform going into an SAP solution that's being hosted in AWS, but through the Windows Virtual Desktop experience, they're getting that same common Windows experience that they've known to understand. And that 365 experience, still includes capabilities like that Outlook search. So I'm a big files and folders and having structure in my Outlook. So each client has their own folder, and those folders become pretty big. So you can still use the same search functionality to pull up old files, and then, or emails, I should say, and then containerized user profiles using this FS Logics technology. So if there's any security folks on the line, that's going to be a question you have that we can definitely hit on, and happy to follow up with further details. But one of the biggest things you want here is making sure that each user, if you're pooling their resources together, right, and they're hitting the same VM for the same image, you want to make sure they're not necessarily crossing information, right? And if I search my desktop, I shouldn't be able to see files that were overexposed from someone else's desktop. So that FS Logics technology is built in to make sure that each user logging into their virtual desktop only sees what they should be seeing. And then if you're a Teams shop, the feature parity for Teams in Windows Virtual Desktop is, I call it almost feature parity, because it's pretty much there. But again, if you had trialed this a year or two ago, you couldn't do meetings and calls like you can with an on-premise installation. So a lot of that has been addressed and is full featured now. So that's exciting. And then of course security. I mentioned it briefly, right? But you can configure all those same Azure security services that you may or may not be using today, but by using an Azure deployment like WVD, things like multi-factor authentication and conditional access policies can be built in to your environment. Conditional access policies are where, if it's an approved IP coming from approved internet connection or Wi-Fi location or an office building, right, then they can log in without having to prove a second form of identification. So we can build those into a WVD instance alone. And then there are 3 security advantages that we can hit on here. So one is your attack surface is reduced, and that's because Microsoft uses something called reverse connect technology. Essentially what reverse connect technology means is that they are not opening inbound ports to those virtual machines. So there are fewer places for the bad actors to attack. And then we have the ability to define role-based access, and that means that you can actually parse out administration tasks, and you can protect the most sensitive user groups and workloads by doing so. And then those isolated users sessions. So there's a difference between single and multi-session environments that we'll touch on from an architectural perspective as well. But the ability to make sure that those users are partitioned off is taken care of within the product and easily configurable. So another thing I like to highlight too is if you're not familiar with Azure, what I highly recommend, I hope you are, but if you're not, what I highly recommend is at CES just recently, Brad Smith, one of Microsoft's executives, just did like a 4-minute video of a tour through their Quincy, Washington data center. And this thing was 2 million square feet, just impressive statistics all around. This is where they're hosting and running the Azure infrastructure and platform as a service, the 365 productivity applications that we're signing into, but it's one of at least 54 Azure regions. It's probably more at this point, and by next week it may be even more. They're building like crazy. But to be able to spin up a local instance, in a data center near you to take advantage of any potential latency issues, and then let's say you've got users in the UK or you got users in India or China, you can make sure that their WVD image is managed in that local region as well. So they're not logging in India and trying to ping a data center in Quincy, Washington, right, and experiencing those latency issues. And then from a security perspective, I could do a whole webinar about this, but a lot of people, the marketplace in general, let's say, doesn't see Microsoft as a cybersecurity organization. But just some numbers to throw at you on the slide there. Over 7 trillion signals monitored on a daily basis, over 3,500 full-time security professionals, and $1 billion annually reinvested into their cybersecurity solutions. So I challenge any client to do the same. I haven't seen one today, but I would love to tour the data centers that's as secure as that. But as you hear things in the news, the SolarWinds attack, election interference, I just had a security newsletter hit my inbox this morning that was Microsoft releasing more information around the SolarWinds attack. So a lot of those alerts nowadays are actually coming from Microsoft, and I think it's time they sort of take their rightful flag and place it on the top of the mountain of the cybersecurity conversation as well. And I'm happy to talk more about EMS. We have a great security solutions specialist that does sessions at Microsoft Ignite, but that's not why y'all are here necessarily. So let's talk about the savings too, right? If you're not familiar with Windows 10 multi-session, what that is essentially a remote desktop session host that allows multiple concurrent interactive sessions. And that used to be something you could only do in Windows Server. So now being able to do that with the Windows OS, with a Windows 10 image, provides a ton of advantages when it comes to savings, not just on your licensing, but also on your compute and storage. And that plays into some of the auto scaling that we're going to see how Nerdio manages that. So if you have a RDS CALs today or Microsoft 365 licensing E3 or E5, you can most likely bring that licensing, those user-based licenses, into a WVD environment and not have to pay for any additional licensing. And then obviously the labor, why manage this environment through the server and the closet at HQ, right? Put this into these multi-million, billion-dollar facilities, build in geo redundancy, and free up your team to do some of that more proactive work. And then one of the beautiful things around WVD is their strong ecosystem. So not just Microsoft VARs like Synergy Technical and MSPs to help you install, configure, secure, but also they're approved providers. So if you have an architecture that relies on Citrix or VMware, those are big names that everyone's got installed somewhere. They have integrations to make sure that you can still run that in their environment. And then, hey, I've got third-party applications, I got integrations. I need an add-on really for my users to be able to manage their environment, or for my team to be able to make sure it's more secure than out of the box. There's a lot of value-added partners, and at Synergy Technical, we chose to partner with Nerdio to be able to sort of decrease the time it takes to pilot the solution, because a lot of times that's the biggest hurdle, to say, let's put 10 users in this space and see how it actually performs with our image, right? So why Windows Virtual Desktop? Just a couple slides to hit on this. If it's not the same user experience, there's going to be a lot of hesitancy, right? So there's a lot of cool things that have been built in. I'm not going to hit on each bullet point here, but two that we see from the productivity side that sort of stand out is that your OneDrive can still sync even when scaling on demand. So if I keep my, just to use round numbers, if I keep my virtual machine in Azure pooled at resources just enough for 10 users to log in, but now it's peak morning time and I've got 40 users signed in. When they log in through that RS Logix technology, sign in, their user profile gets signed to a new image, that OneDrive immediately syncs with them. So they see all their files and folders just like if they were logging on to a local desktop. And then co-authoring and collaboration. What would a Microsoft webinar be without talking about co-authoring and collaboration, right? I was doing a co-authoring of a PowerPoint presentation at about 7 a.m. this morning. It was like watching a movie with the real-time text being displayed by someone 3 hours away, updating a PowerPoint slide. But that's just the nerd in me, considering that calling that a movie-esque feature. But that same capability applies in Windows Virtual Desktop. So you can bring that same Teams collaboration to a user, even in a VDI infrastructure. And then we've talked a lot about this, so let's dive into, in my sales capabilities, into persistent and pooled resources and what a single session versus multi-session really means for you. So instead of assigning 10 desktops or 10 users, or scale that out to 1,000 desktops for 1,000 users, your users may not need a desktop for 8 hours a day. They may work in shifts, they may work around the globe in different time zones. So you can scale out either across servers. You can say, as I need more desktops, spin up more VMs in Azure, or you can scale up and say, I'll pay for the compute and storage on a larger VM, but I only want 5 desktops deployed, or I only need 100 deployed at any given point in time. And as more users sign in, just increase the demand on that VM. And you have the option to configure that. I'm sure Tony will show how easy it is to do. But in that sense, then you're only paying for the actual compute that's needed. And then on the flip side, with single session, if you have high profile users, you need to make sure that for whatever reason, they need to have their own dedicated session. You can assign them that single session that's always on. Whereas the flip side, right, shift workers, scenarios such as that, you can spin up their desktops as needed. No matter what, these users all remain isolated from each other with no ability to see files or user experience of those other profiles. And you might be saying, Dan, you're in sales. There's no way this is less expensive than my current footprint. So let's talk about it. So the first economic benefit for the infrastructure is having that Windows 10 experience at a multi-session cost. So with today's VDI solutions, right, you either have to go to Windows Server RDS, which compromises on the user experience, or a Windows 10 single session, which compromises on cost. You have to pay for each single session, right? So with WVD, you can actually take advantage of both. So in this migration scenario here you're seeing on the slide, you can use Windows 10 single session on-prem today for that better user experience. Windows Virtual Desktop would be the best solution for you going forward because it doesn't only provide the local Windows 10-like experience for your end users, but also saves you real money because of that multi-session capability. So you see on the left, what this is showing is essentially a small virtual machine per user, which usually ends up with low utilization. And then in comparison, in the middle is a multi-session deployment. So you have a larger shared VM that supports multiple users, and you can have higher utilization on that. And then since you have fewer VMs, you have lower operational costs, right? So this shows a savings of up to 1/6 of your original cost with the deployment on the left-hand side there. On top of that, we talked about compute and storage. This is a demonstration of if you're going to do this on-prem, you have to pay for max usage, right? You've got to scale out those resources to say, if I have 100 users logged in at 8 a.m. checking their email, I have to have resources assigned 24/7 for that type of infrastructure. And with Azure, you can actually do through reserved instances and things like that. You can reserve essentially the minimal known compute and storage that you're going to be utilizing. And then as users increase and sign in and create more desktop images, you just use the pay-as-you-go function within Azure. So there's a dramatic savings within that as well. And I want to make sure we leave time for Tony. Typical sales guy talking a little too much, but on the networking side, that works pretty similar as well. But one of the key caveats here, right, is when you build on-prem, you have to build for peak two-way traffic. And in WVD, if you remember before, you actually only pay for outbound traffic. And you can even further optimize your cost by using a fixed fee option with something like ExpressRoute, which is a fixed fee data plan. So that would cover your base usage, much like a reserved instance in an Azure VM. And then with that variable outbound traffic, if you need additional bandwidth, it's more of a pay-as-you-go service. And then with the RDS scenario that we've deployed before, this is really another key benefit around that Windows Server licensing. So in this scenario, you move the RDS deployment from on-prem into WVD. With on-prem, you still have to license Windows Server for each of your remote desktop session host VMs. But when you move it to WVD, again, you eliminate that need to bring your own Windows Server license, and every session host VM can be charged that base Linux compute rate in this scenario. So in this scenario, it's a 65% savings. And of course, these are nice big numbers, right? And you're saying, Dan, there's no way you can save me 65% in my environment. We offer one-day workshops that do design and planning, 3-day workshops where you're actually implemented in WVD over the course of 3 days and configure some of those prereqs. So you'll see in the bullet points here, they're actually being conservative on the on-prem estimates and their calculations. But I would say, you know, even if it's not 65% savings on RDS cals and compute and storage and networking costs and infrastructure, if it's 20%, that's real dollars in your P&L, right? So I would be open to that conversation with each of the attendees here today. OpEx, I don't think I have to talk about this too much. I think most of those folks registered today are familiar with the CapEx versus OpEx conversation. But one thing that's interesting with WVD is the ability to charge, departmental cross charge, right? So saying these users are from my finance division, these users are from HR, and here's their actual usage for the month within those user profiles, and I can charge that group accordingly. So a nice function there that most people don't think of in their planning stage. And I think you trust me on now that there's some savings. So let's move to the final slide. This is sort of a Microsoft overview, right, and their commitment to the platform. I already mentioned they're on version 2, essentially, of their WVD infrastructure, and version 3 is soon down the pipe. And one of the biggest things that I'll sort of touch on here as you read through those points is one of the scenarios I just came off of piloting with a global pharmaceutical organization. And they actually have a SAP instance in AWS. They have users up and down the East Coast in the UK and India signing into their WVD pilot. They're using Nerdio to manage it. And there's only latency to an acceptable degree for their users that are logging in from India. And that's because of that scenario where they're actually logging into an East Coast data center. But they're heavy financial users with Excel spreadsheets. There's iPad users that are using a Windows OS platform from their iPad only. And then there's SAP users that spend 8 hours a day in SAP. And they actually, after pricing this out, they're reducing their cost of the AWS workspaces by 50%. So they have hundreds of workspaces in AWS, virtual desktops, that they're going to be moving over to the WVD platform because the cost was 50% less. So we ran that pilot over the course of about 30 days, and it was a huge success for them. And Tony, before I kick it over to you, I'm just going to highlight this here, and then we'll come back to you at the end. But obviously, from the cost savings, this is being promoted not just by Synergy Technical, but Nerdio and Microsoft are putting some skin in the game. So Nerdio, as an ISV with Microsoft, are doing 30-day trial licensing before you have to make any sort of commitment to them. And they have multiple different SKUs and offerings if you do choose to move forward with them. And Microsoft's running a promotion as well on your Azure compute costs for any new customers in the WVD space. So now through March 31, you can discount up to 30% for qualified customers. So would be happy to further the conversation. But first, I want to give you a bit of a demo here and talk about how do I manage this from the administrative standpoint. So with that, I would like to introduce Tony Kai, a friend over at Nerdio, who's going to walk us through their solution and sort of tie a bow on some of the things that I talked about here today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's a great introduction to WVD. Yeah, my name is Tony. I'm one of the sales leads at Nerdio, and Windows Virtual Desktop was announced and released and became general availability in October of 2019. And they left a big gap in their product, right? So a lot of customers, when they started out with WVD, especially in the early days in version 1, like Dan mentioned, it was completely PowerShell based, meaning to spin up VMs and to add users and to configure anything about WVD was completely PowerShell and API based. So since then, version 2, which is known as the ARM version of WVD, was released, which basically slapped a GUI on top of the PowerShell, which you can now use the Azure portal to manage. But even then, it wasn't as easy as what people hoped it would be, right? So, you have players in the game like Citrix and Horizons that have been in the game for 15, 20 years at this point. A lot of enterprises either switching from those solutions or looking to go WVD native said, well, I looked at, I'm coming from a Citrix environment. The maturity of the product is there. It doesn't seem like WVD out of the box is as mature as the ones that have been around for all those years. And they're correct, right? So that left a big gap in this space around the provisioning, the optimization, and the day-to-day management of WVD that enabled a company like us, Nerdio, to create a solution that's designed to be sort of a add-on on top of the native WVD to make the management and the optimization piece for IT administrators much easier, right? So I'm going to go and take over the screen share. So if you haven't played with WVD yet, and you have an Azure account, I would ask that you guys go into the Azure portal and start messing around with it. But you'll start realizing that WVD, from just to spin up a single machine, that's pretty straightforward and easy. But there's different components of WVD that you need to configure, right? Dan brought up FS Logics. That causes a huge amount of headaches if you're not familiar with how that technology works. So there's a lot of little things in and around WVD that makes an IT administrator's life pretty difficult if you were to roll something out like this in production. For example, imaging, let's say updating a new image, right, and then rolling that image out in a scheduled fashion. That's something that natively in Windows Virtual Desktop isn't available yet. So there's a lot of little things like that makes it sort of not, quote unquote, enterprise ready is what a lot of our customers tell me, right? So I just want to show you a quick demo of what Nerdio is and how folks have used Nerdio to kind of enhance their WVD experience. So Nerdio is a web application that gets deployed out of the Azure Marketplace. And if you want to look for Nerdio, you just kind of search Nerdio in the app marketplace. And as long as you have global admin, rights to your tenant and owner of your Azure subscription, you're more than welcome to kind of install this. And like Dan said, there's a 30-day trial of this. So and if you need more, you can reach out to Dan and we can kind of extend that trial. But once you install the application looks like this. Looks kind of pretty plain, but I guarantee you it's pretty powerful. You'll get a custom URL that is deployed inside your own Azure subscription. So from a security standpoint, it's not an application that lives outside of your Azure environment. It's an application that gets deployed inside your Azure environment. Which enabled us to get huge clients like PayPal and Utz Potato Chips and all the and banks around the world, Abu Dhabi Bank, all those customers of ours that use Nerdio vetted our solution through their security staff and found our solution very secure, right? So from a security standpoint, we're not a third-party solution that has access to your infrastructure. We actually get installed into your infrastructure, and the application runs from within your Azure subscription. So once I load the application, I'm automatically logged in using my Azure AD credentials, right? So you're using Azure AD to log in, as long as you have the appropriate role-based access controls and have access to the WVD workspace, you'll be able to, after installation, you'll be able to pick up any existing workspaces you currently have, or if you have nothing, you can go and add a new workspace and go through the wizard to kind of set it up in a specific region, right? Once you press OK, Nerdio is going to automate a lot of that processes to set up a new workspace. And that's really the theme of our product, right? Our product is a lot of automation, right? A lot of IT administration tasks that you would have to normally do manually in multiple steps, all done with a simple, 3-click process is what we try to aim for. So there's a couple of scenarios or reasons why you would use Nerdio. The number one reason is the cost savings aspects, right? So Dan mentioned, you can save up to 65% on Azure when you're coming from an on-prem environment just by going to WVD. Well, what if I could tell you that, with that 60% discount, I could take another 80% off of your consumption of Azure if you use Nerdio with it, right? So we're able to achieve that because we have a unique algorithm that, again, Microsoft native you can't do. That takes the session hosts and dynamically scales them up and down, in and out as you need them, right? So I'm going to go and click on my workspace, which will show me a list of all my pools in my demo environment. So pools are sort of like RDS collections or a farm of multiple RDS hosts, right? And we refer to RDS a lot when we talk about WVD because that's a solution that's, again, been around for a long time that anybody can, probably has experience with. But the main thing about WVD that's different than RDS is that it's a Windows 10 multi-session operating system. Right, and those roles, right, that the RDS required you to have to make it run best practices, like having a gateway server and having a connection broker server, all those roles are now Microsoft hosted and managed by them. So again, you're not exposing 3389 out to the World Wide Web. You're not needing a VPN to connect to WVD. It does work a lot like Citrix workspaces and how they have the Citrix receiver. Microsoft is sort of playing catch up to that, right? And a lot of times, the native solution is not only much cheaper, but the capabilities are getting better every single day, right? So I have here a list of different pools as an example, and you can kind of see different types of pools. And if I click inside of a pool, you'll see like different host pools. So these are the actual session hosts that your users are actually logging into. And what Nerdio has built is really a UI interface that sits on top of WVD and allows you to manage a lot of these things in a IT administrator friendly way. Right. So if I want to add users to the host pool, I click on the host pool, I click on manage, I go to users and groups, and it'll load all my Azure Active Directory users. I can add people to the group by AD groups or by individual users, right? But let's go back to that cost savings area, right? So like I said, Nerdio is going to be able to save you about 75 to 80% off on top of the cost savings you're getting from just moving from on-prem to the cloud. And we show you what those cost savings are. So we're not really even making it up, right? This is based on real-time cost savings by the pool. So think of these pools as maybe a department that shares a different golden image, for example. Let's say you have a field text team that reside in this pool. Right, inside this pool has 2 session hosts right now for them to use. Maybe you have a marketing team that's on a different pool, a finance team on a different pool using a different image, and they have different auto scaling times, right? So you can kind of set the times up. Nerdio is going to do its thing by scaling a machine back in when nobody's using it, and then scaling it back out as people start logging in. And we're going to show you that cost savings. So let me just quickly go through some of the properties of auto scaling. And just to give you guys an idea of like what's capable, right? So we're gonna kind of get pretty technical here in just a minute, but so this is the auto scaling settings for a specific dynamic host pool, and in section 1 you get to specify what the minimum and maximum capacity of that pool is, right? So if you think about a HR department, right? Maybe you have a pretty set schedule. 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is when you expect the users to log in, and maybe you have 50 people in that organization, right? So 50 people in that organization. If you go with let's say an E16 SV3 example of a VM, which is a 16 core, let's go with this one, E16 DSV4, which is 16 core, 128 gig RAM machine, which I would say if you're a heavy power user, you can expect about 16 people to use that machine in a shared environment where everybody gets their own desktop shared off of a single machine, and they would run pretty well. So if you have 50 people, you might want to start your day off with one host, right, in your capacity, and then maybe max out to 3 of those machines, right? So you're setting the lower and maximum limits for that specific pool. And if you pay attention to the top left-hand corner, we're even telling you if you're at the minimum, your costs to run this for this amount of users is somewhere between $300 to $3,000 a month. Now it's a huge range, right? And so we're going to tighten down the range down a little bit. So when does it scale up and down? So there's a couple of different algorithms that Nerdio has come up with, right? You can base it off of CPU. So you can tell Nerdio, hey, add a new session host, right, which adds a capacity of 16 more people, if the CPU utilization across all current hosts exceed 65% over 5 minutes, right, or more over 5 minutes. That's an example. And then at the end of the day, maybe after 6 p.m., I can remove a host, right, eliminating a single session host. If you're doing the pay-as-you-go, you can eliminate that host, the cost of that host, if the CPU utilization across all current hosts drop below, let's say 40% over 15 minutes. So you can use the CPU to be the trigger to let Nerdio know when to add a new session host. And when I say add a new session host, we're not only creating it from your golden image, but we're joining it to your domain. We're adding the applications that your customer needs all in real time, right? And then when the reverse happens, when a machine gets scaled back in, we'll unjoin that machine from your domain and then delete the machine, delete the disk that comes with it, and really help you save that cost. And you can kind of control when it scales in, when it scales out, how aggressive we want to scale, right? So maybe you want it so even after 6 or 7 p.m. And somebody happens to still be using it because they're working late, we can make it medium aggressiveness, which tells the system, hey, wait for the last person to log off before you start scaling them back in. Right, because the last thing you want is somebody in the middle of their work, maybe busy tax season, and you scale them back in aggressively. So that's one algorithm. Another one, so another algorithm is a different way to kind of think about how you want to scale in. So in this one, we call average active sessions, which tells us, start a new VM if the average active sessions across all hosts exceed, let's say, 15 people, then go and add a new session host to add 16 more capacity, right? And maybe remove session hosts, start to remove session hosts if the average active sessions across all hosts drop below 5. So you can kind of do it by CPU, you could do it by user, you could do it by a couple of different methods. So you can start to think about how we're able to really help you save money because we're intelligently, on demand based on actual usage, scaling in or out versus if you were on premise, like Dan said, you have to kind of really buy everything at the get-go, and hopefully you don't need to surpass that, or otherwise you have to add more memory or add more CPUs. So at night it can scale all the way back down to 0 machines, right? So maybe between the hours of 10 and 6 a.m. nobody's using it. So now you have 0 WVD session hosts running, which means that's 100% savings for that pool. But let's say Monday through Friday people start logging in at 6 a.m. and you want 3 machines to be up and available, which means you have 3 machines at 16 capacity each. You have over 40 users that can log in, starting at 6 a.m. to kind of and we're doing this to really help you with the login storm that you'd expect at 6 or 7 a.m. right? And we have different things to kind of help you heal broken hosts. So if you've ever used WVD, there is one thing that's a little bit annoying, right? The WVD works a lot like Citrix, where there's a Citrix agent or a WVD agent that checks in with the WVD broker. Sometimes that agent reports some not so nice statuses, right? So it might show that it's disconnected, or it's in the middle of upgrading, or upgrade failed. If Nerdio notices any of these broker settings or statuses, we're able to kind of reboot that machine to kind of try to bring it back to a healthy state. And if that doesn't work, we'll completely remove that machine, unjoin it from your domain, and then recreate a new machine from your golden image, rejoin it to your domain, and make that available. So a lot of people who are in production with WVD find this as a huge bonus feature, because that's something that they, without the tool, they don't have to kind of monitor and provide fixes for every time something like this happens. Now, it doesn't happen often, but once in a while, you want to do everything you can to kind of avoid that help desk call, right? So that's sort of a quick overview of like the auto scaling capabilities, and because we're scaling in and out, we're able to calculate the cost savings and provide the costing, and provide you the history and the history over time, and how the environment's able to scale in and out, and how much money it's saved over time, right? And you can kind of set a specific custom time range. You can kind of see over, let's say, the course of 1 month, based on the auto scaling, we're able to save X amount of dollars for this particular host pool, right? And of course, this is a demo environment, because so nobody's really logging into it, nobody's using it, so the savings are sort of minimum. But so that's one area that and obviously there's a lot to this product, right? I can't really go over all of it in the amount of time we have, so I'm just going to point out the quick areas that from an IT administrator standpoint, it might be useful. So how many of you guys out there sort of manage golden images, right? So the process of managing a golden image in Azure with WVD is very, very difficult. There's multiple sort of steps to kind of achieve and capture and hold that image object. In Nerdio, we make that much easier. You go and add a new image from the Azure library. You can select a fresh one from a fresh golden image, right? Let's say you want to pick Windows 10 2012, 20H2 with Pro Plus installed. You want to, specify local admin. You press OK. Nerdio is going to go and grab that image from the Azure Marketplace and make it available for you to turn on and use. So if I want to power something on, I'm going to press OK, right? And it's going to go and turn on that machine. And when that machine's on, I'm going to go and RDP into this IP address of this this golden image, make my updates, and then click on the button that says Power Off and Set as Image. So when you click on Power Off and Set as Image, which is a completed task here, you can kind of see in the detail log what Nerdio does step by step to kind of sysprep and generalize that image and capture and all that stuff, right? So each one of these steps is something that a IT administrator would have to go through manually if they didn't have something like Nerdio. All right, so in 10 minutes, this image gets sysprepped, but we saw a lot of problems with sysprep, right? A lot of times when you sysprep something, sysprep actually removes or actually breaks something that you've installed. So we've actually come out with something called scripted actions, which is basically a library of PowerShell scripts that we've written, but you could also add your own, right? That you can run post sysprep. So think about this. If I've updated an image, right? Let's say I've updated this executive image. I click Power Off and set as image. I can schedule it. I can do all sorts of things, run specific PowerShell commands. I could have a new image come out of the Azure Marketplace and maybe update Teams after sysprep or install this application or do this, I can schedule that and press OK, and then I go back to my workspace, right? And let's say I want to re-image every single machine in this specific host pool. I can go to that specific host pool's options. I can go to host. I can resize re-image, and now pick that new image, right? And maybe you can re-image, 5 machines at a time, and maybe you want to re-image it every single day at 3 a.m. We can do things like that, right? So those are the capabilities that you can't do in native WVD right now, but Nerdio's with the Nerdio tool on top of it, you can you can do a lot of those things that make a WVD deployment enterprise ready. So that's another area where a lot of people use Nerdio for this specific purpose, right? The ability to manage images and to re-image them in an automated fashion. I would say the third thing that people use Nerdio for, and for those who have used WVD or are familiar with WVD, you'll appreciate this, right? So with WVD, there is no way right now to kind of manage what's going on inside of a session host, right? So you can see certain statuses from the broker level, like if somebody got kicked out or somebody got disconnected, but you can't really see what's going on inside of a session host. So what Nerdio has done is we partnered with another third-party solutions provider called Sapago, which is a company out of Germany, and they make this little agent that gets installed onto the session host that Nerdio helps install. That helps capture a lot of the information that is missing, right? So that helps you troubleshoot. So right here we have 3 type of dashboards, right? And we're pulling information from Log Analytics Workspace. We're able to dump that information into your Log Analytics Workspace and then extract the information and create dashboards for IT to help troubleshoot certain issues, right? So you can kind of see, based on a specific host pool over the last 7 days, these are my active versus inactive users. This is my average desktop connect time, right? So the amount of time it takes to connect to WVD, the amount of time it takes to load up your desktop, right? The number of logins per hour, per day, latency. You can kind of see a list of all your users and their sessions over the last 7 days. So if I kind of double click on this guy, Chris Jones, why did it take him 46 seconds to log into WVD, right? I can actually double click his name and it'll give me a breakdown of his individual sessions. And I can just double click one of his sessions and get a further breakdown of why, a desktop took so long to load, right, as an example. So you can kind of all sorts of information that you can't get natively, like desktop load time, average latency, average input delay. You can see what egress data that person is consuming, right? So this person has consumed 24 gigs of egress data over the last 7 days, and you can see how much of his FSLogix profile space is free. So it's an example of like how the data and what this provides helps you troubleshoot, right? So let's look at the session host option. So inside the session host dashboard, let's say all of a sudden you're getting a lot of calls on your help desk indicating that something might be running slow. So you kind of come here, you kind of look at the spikes. So let's say you want to highlight the spike to investigate this particular period of time. You can highlight that, and Nerdio is going to load just the data in that time period. And we're going to say, hey, there's 2 session hosts running at that time. Here are your users. Here's what they were doing. This is the apps that we're using. I can click on an event, right? So now we're looking at CPU usage over 50%. I can click on a specific event, and again, it will load the event with all the apps that particular during that was running at that particular time. Why is it no queries?
This tool was awesome, specifically during the pilot phase for one of my clients. They were able to investigate, at the user level, essentially, and see from a dashboard perspective what their experience was like. So users that may have experienced latency but didn't report it to the administrators, right? They were able actually to go back proactively, reach out to those users and address those situations.
Right. Because a lot of times, if somebody calls in and let's say you didn't have information like this, it'd be very hard. Especially if somebody says, oh, well, it happened before, but it's not happening now, right? So it's hard to shadow somebody and say, hey, I see exactly what the problem is, but here you can. So that'd be another reason why somebody would use Nerdio, right? There's many reasons, right? The whole concept of this whole portal makes managing WVD much easier. But those specific areas I talked about today are pain points in the way that people manage WVD natively today. So I'd like to maybe stop here and, if anybody has any questions specifically about WVD or Nerdio or anything like that, Dan and I can help answer those.
So there are not currently any questions in the chat right now, but if anybody wants to drop any in there or turn their mic on, we are at your disposal, so go for it.
And while we wait for questions, I think between the introduction to WVD and showing you how to manage WVD with a tool like Nerdio, maybe it's a good idea to show them what a WVD login experience is like, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have here my normal desktop, right? My desktop I use at home, right? And you can use WVD obviously with the thin client, with any Mac PC, any type of device. But the key to entering WVD in a secure fashion is to use this remote desktop client. So this remote desktop client, if you've used Citrix or using Citrix, is very similar to the Citrix receiver or the VMware Horizon View client. But Microsoft made their own client, and strangely enough, it's not called WVD client, it's called remote desktop, which is sort of confusing. But you're logging in using your Azure AD credentials, right? So the same user name and password you're using for your Office 365 account, that's the account that you're going to use to log into WVD. And once I log in, you're going to see what IT has published to you, right? So you can give somebody a remote app experience, right? Or a full desktop experience. So if I want the full desktop experience, I just double click the desktop I want. And you kind of see the login process, very similar in the look and feel of RDS. But again, 3389 is not open. And I'm, in fact, running a multi-session Windows 10 machine with other users in the host. All right, so you can see, two other people in my demo environment that's logged in right now. So once you get in here, I mean, everything is very similar to the way that the Windows 10 machine works on premise, right? Microsoft, through its Fast Track program, has a program called App Assurance. So they can actually guarantee that if you have an application running on RDS, right, legacy RDS, or an on-prem Windows 7 or Windows 10 machine, that they will work with you to get that application running in WVD if it just doesn't work out of the box. So it's a really good guarantee from Microsoft that says anything running in a multi-session environment before and or running in Windows 7 or Windows 10 will be able to run in WVD guaranteed. So the same familiar things you have with like map drives and printer redirection, audio and camera redirection is another big plus in WVD, which you couldn't do inside of RDS, right? If you tried to redirect your camera and microphone in RDS, you'd actually end up consuming a lot of your CPU usage on your session host. But also at the same time, the video and the audio would not be as clear as if you tried doing it in WVD. So one of the innovations of WVD, they're able to kind of offload the camera and audio traffic to the local endpoint itself. Same with Zoom. So all those are sort of WVD specific innovations that you can't find anywhere else.
Awesome. Appreciate you sharing that, Tony. And yeah, just to duplicate, some of the things you showed that have really resonated with our client base as well as that ability to manage the desktop image and make changes and update in the one location and push it out to those users so seamlessly has been awesome, because you really create user profiles, right? I mean, which user needs what apps and versions assigned to them. And then can manage that all in that easy to use interface. So easy, I dare say a sales guy could do it.
Yeah.
And then the auto scaling. If folks attending here today, if you haven't worked with the Azure pricing calculator online, I'm happy to send you the link or walk you through it. It can get a little complicated, but that Azure pricing calculator, I've done numerous exercises comparing costs for clients, and you go into the Nerdio interface, during a pilot, and that the cost comparisons and the cost savings is exactly what the calculator says, you would have been able to predict going in. So it's a really nice tool to, have the admins be focused and increase, their administrative capabilities. Really, in my opinion, it increases what they could do as opposed to the native interface.
Yeah, and actually many times it actually saves more than what the Azure calculator will tell you. So
right. Yep. Well, good stuff. I'll just throw this slide up there, I believe, is just a quick thank you. If we don't have any further questions, I appreciate y'all joining us here today. And there is my email address. If you don't have it already, feel free to reach out with any questions or follow up. If you're interested in one of the Kickstarter workshops, or you want to have a further demonstration from Tony and dive deeper into the Nerdio solution, we'll get you connected with them as well. Or you can go to the Azure Marketplace and find Nerdio and engage with that 30-day trial.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and thanks everyone for joining. Have a good rest of the week.